Namaste and welcome to this video on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, a scientific inquiry into how the mind works. Extraordinary, it's actually an extraordinary piece of work by Patanjali. Now this text, the first sutra, is worth commenting on because it begins with now. Now the exposition of yoga is being made. The here and now. This is not a trend. This is not something what will change. It exists in the here and now and has already existed. It is the knowledge of your mind and how your mind works. And that takes us to the second sutra, which is Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And that is the whole goal of yoga. The restraint of the modifications of the mind stuff is yoga. Restraining the mind from being modified from its natural state is the whole purpose of yoga. What is the natural state of mind? Meditation. What is meditation? Meditation is when the mind becomes still. So the whole purpose of yoga is to prevent it from being modified by these mental modifications. When the mind is still, when the mind has become quiet, then we get to the third sutra, the seer abides in his own true nature. That is the whole goal, where the goal is to restrain the mind from being changed, keeping it steady, keeping it calm. Then the seer abides in his own true nature. Then we become the authentic self. What is the self? I guess you could say the self is the soul. And what is the soul? The soul is a reflection of God on the mind. So everything is God. Now that's kind of a profound statement that could possibly get me into trouble, because you hear a lot of New Agers saying we're God, I'm God, and we're God. But given what we know of God through religions, it doesn't mean the same thing. The problem is that how the religions describe God is not God at all. That's the problem. What is God then? It's very difficult for me to describe the undescribable, but to put it simply, it's a higher consciousness. It's a higher consciousness that is in everything, so it's within you as well. And the only way to access that higher consciousness is to elevate the mind. We're living in a three-dimensional reality, for example. The fourth dimension is time. The mind is above time and space. So the mind can go to any level of dimensional reality that it chooses. The fifth dimension is when we are capable of being in two different places at the same time, meaning that your consciousness has expanded beyond the limited three-dimensional reality of this world. Once you expand your consciousness beyond the limitation of this three-dimensional world, you are in fifth dimension. It's kind of like being on the internet. You can open up a page and see what's going on in other parts of the world, and then open up another page and also see what's going on in your hometown. That is kind of like what fifth dimensional reality is. Once you get to the sixth dimension and seventh dimension, of course, you are out of time and you're in higher consciousness. That's God, which means it's everywhere and it's within you as well. So he then goes on to say that he goes on into the fourth sutra to say, at other times the self appears to assume the forms of the mental modifications, the vrittis. So if your mind is focused on a certain thought or pattern, a conception, then you become that. So the goal then is to get the mind clean and steady so that it doesn't reflect the modifications, but instead reflects the self within. Then Patanjali goes on to explain that there are 5 different kinds of mental modifications. He goes in detail to explain what these mental modifications are. And they are right knowledge, misconception, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. Those are the 5 modifications. Note that even right knowledge is a modification. So the knowledge that we get here is not the same as the permanent knowledge that exists in the higher levels of reality. And he cites right knowledge as the sources of right. He even cites what the sources of right knowledge are, and they are direct perception, because once you get a direct experience of something, you know that it's true. It's what's called an epiphany. You have a sudden revelation of something, and once that happens, you know that it's true. You can't deny something that you have directly experienced. The other source of right knowledge, he says, is inference. Inference means, well, if I smell smoke, I can infer that there must be a fire somewhere. And the third source of right knowledge is scriptural testimony. Now, a lot of us would probably argue with that, but in reality, scriptures were based on individuals who experienced the truth. Yes, the Bible, for example, has been altered, has been changed, has been edited, and it went from its original language, which was a poetic form, which, as we know, poems are mostly symbolic and not literal. It went from a poetic form to a prose form once it was translated. So yes, a lot of the meaning gets lost. Language, of course, language itself can change the truth. I have an experience of something and I try to tell you about it, it doesn't come out the same. Nonetheless, the individuals who received this knowledge and in whom the scriptures were based on did have an understanding, and we do say that it is a direct source of knowledge. If you read the Beatitudes of Christ and some of Jesus' teaching, his parables, he never actually spoke about the truth directly because people would think he was crazy. He spoke in parables in kind of metaphorical language that people would understand it through metaphors, because a lot of what he's talking about was abstract ideas. So he used a lot of metaphors to try and bring that reality into more concrete language. So those are the sources of right knowledge. But note that, again, that even right knowledge is a mental modification. So even right knowledge has to go once you are ready to receive the truth of reality. Then he goes on to talk about the other modifications. Misconception. Misconception, of course, occurs when something is not based on its true form. I'm walking along in the dark and I see something on the ground that looks like a snake, and I mistake it for a snake, but when we bring a light to it, it's nothing but a coiled rope. That is a misconception. The same with verbal delusion. An image that arises on hearing mere words without any reality is a verbal delusion. You hear something, but really there is nothing like that. You hear a lot of this in a lot of the New Age language, for example. I mean, I often hear people talk about, how to open up your third eye. Your third eye is already open. It's the only reason why we don't have the experience of the totality of existence is because of the mind. And this is what Patanjali is trying to tell us. It's this tapestry of conceptions and our ideas of reality that we have built in our mind that forms a kind of veil over the third eye that prevents us from seeing the entire truth. So the mind must be dismantled. The mind is a construct. The mind is a sensory organ that picks up sensory impressions from the outside world. Those sensory impressions then give rise to the ego. So the ego and the mind are temporary cultural constructs. They're formed from the scripts and narratives circulating in the environment. And it means that those scripts and narratives aren't really the truth. So that's verbal delusion. A lot of what we hear in the New Age community is ideas that aren't really true. And then he goes on to talk about sleep, that mental modification supported by cognition of nothingness is sleep. Although we do not have any thought in the mind during sleep, we actually have the thought of having no thought. And then, of course, in sleep you have a lot of dreams, and dreams are memories that are coming up from the subconscious. If your third eye was closed, how do you dream? How do you see these things? You wouldn't be able to if your third eye was closed. When a mental modification of an object previously experienced and not forgotten comes back into consciousness, that is memory. Memories are thought forms, or forms of vrittis. And memories are complex because some of these memories, called samskaras, can exist from lifetimes. If any experience that we had, that we retained, and we didn't forget it and we didn't let it go, that remains in our subconscious and forms what we call a kind of samskara. And a samskara is a deeply rooted memory that can actually propel us into similar experiences in this life and color our present reality. So it's a kind of psychological blindness in a way. And the Buddha, when he became enlightened, he realized that humanity was fundamentally mentally ill because we have this kind of tapestry, this mind that we have built based on culture, based on past memories. But I believe, and I agree with him, but I believe that it's more of a psychological blindness. The Buddhists talk about the mental continuum that continues, that propels us into future experiences based on these samskaras. So the whole point of yoga, especially pranayama, is to purify out those samskaras because they're really blocking us from experiencing the truth in the here and now. Unless you're in the present here and now, this whole sutras begins with now. The present moment is all we have. And to be fully present and in the present moment, and not in the past and not in the future, to be present in the moment is how we get the truth. These samskaras can keep us in the past. Not only do they keep us in the past, but they can attract to us similar experiences that recreate experiences that we had in the past. It's not a question of there's this whole talk in the New Age community of as you think so you become, and this whole idea that whatever we're thinking, the law of attraction, right? Whatever you think you become, or it's a lot more complex than that. It's really deep-rooted memories that recreate the same situation over and over again. And the only way to purify these memories, one of the best ways to purify these memories, is through pranayama, or what we call Kapalabhati, rapid diaphragmatic breathing, and its advanced form, Bastrika. That technique will purify the frontal lobes of the brain, which lie here, and the frontal lobes of the brain are where the memories lie. That will begin to purify these samskaras. The memories also, the samskaras also form a kind of block to your present reality and cause you to relive past experiences over and over again. I think that's hell. I mean, especially these past experiences weren't that good. It becomes a kind of hell. So those are the modifications. The whole point of yoga is to restrain these modifications, to try to keep the mind in its natural state, which is the state of quiet stillness. And the next sutra, 12, then goes on to talk about how to restrain them. It's very scientific. It's very wonderful how he sets up this whole text. He tells us what these modifications are, and then he tells us how we can restrain them. What is the method? Then he gives us the method through which we can restrain these modifications. And these modifications are restrained by practice and non-attachment. Practice meaning there's a number of, he then goes on later on to talk about the different types of strategies you can use to try to restrain these modifications. And again, one of them is pranayama, the continuous flow of the breath, inhalation and exhalation of the breath. He talks about that much later. because what that does, it purifies the frontal lobe. Other practices are focusing on a single object, such as a white light or even a rose, because by focusing on a single object or a mantra, you burn out all other thoughts. Just like taking a magnifying glass onto the earth and you have that concentration of the sun, it burns. So replacing all thoughts with a single thought, an uplifting thought, a mantra, or visualizing a white light, or keeping the mind on a holy person. These are all methods to reduce, eliminate the samskaras and maintain the steadiness of your mind. So they're restrained by practice, and practice can include any number of strategies, and non-attachment. Of these two, he says in Sutra 13, effort towards steadiness of mind is practice. Anything that helps to steady the mind and keep it calm is considered practice. He doesn't say any kind of religious thing. It's just whatever will keep the mind steady, effort towards steadiness of mind. Whatever it takes to keep the mind steady, to keep it from getting wavy, is practice. The importance of that can't be overemphasized, because if you think about, go into the Hall of Mirrors. You know, you have these places at the circus. You've got these places where you go into where there's these mirrors. And some of these mirrors make you look really, really long. And some of these mirrors make you look really, really wide. They completely distort the way you actually look. Thoughts do the same thing, because thoughts are produce waves in the mind. Imagine if you throw a pebble into a calm lake, it produces ripples. And if you're looking at your reflection in the lake and you throw a pebble, suddenly your reflection becomes distorted. So the mind is a kind of reflection. It's a kind of mirror. And to keep it clean and to keep it steady, you're then going to have a perfect view of the internal self. Not a distorted view, but a perfect view of that. And that itself brings you tremendous peace of mind and bliss and calmness, because it's your eternal self. It's your immortal self. That part of you that doesn't die. And there's a difference between your body and that self. We're so attached to our body. There's the issue of attachment. If you're very attached to your body and it gets sick, you might get depressed. Whereas if you're in touch with the self and your body gets sick, it's not going to change you, because it's just your body that gets. Your body isn't going to last. I mean, we all have to die of some means: old age, death, sickness, accidents. We all have to die of something. But to the person who is established in the self, in his true nature, there's no more death. It's just shedding the skin of this body that I've been given, the body from nature. So your body is mostly composed of nature. But your body can even change when your mind changes. Now that's an interesting thing. You can change the way you look. You can change your body just by changing your mind. So the mind has to be steady and calm to see this eternal self. Then he goes on about establishing practice, and he's Sutra 14, which is a very important sutra, I think one of the most important sutras. He said, practice becomes firmly grounded when well attended for a long time, without break, and in all earnestness. Meaning that you can't just say, oh, once in a while I'll sit down and try to do this. It has to be consistent. Nothing has ever been achieved through practicing now and then. If you want to achieve something and you have your heart set on achieving it, you're going to practice day in and day out. If you're an Olympic person heading for the Olympics, you're going to practice every day to try and be the best that you can be. And it's the same with this. You have to practice this daily to have this mastery over the mind. You've been given this mind, you've been given this body, but it's an animal body, right? And it can cause us a lot of trouble if we don't master it. The only way to master something is to be at it every day. And there's, again, many methods that you can use for keeping this practice steady. In all earnestness means that you have to apply this practice with a certain degree of intensity. Realized souls are very intense. They're very intense people. People often think they're angry. They're not angry. They're just intense people. Because you don't get anywhere without a certain degree of intensity. I mean, if you want to practice, if you want to get into grad school, you want to get into university, you're going to study day in and day out intensely to pass those exams to get into grad school. Well, it's the same with this. You have to apply this with some intensity because you're putting all your energy into something. So practice becomes firmly grounded when well attended to for a long time. It's like trying to master your mind from wandering all over the place. The mind's tendency is to be restless. The mind's tendency is to think by association. So what happens is you get a thought, and that thought reminds you of something else, and that thought reminds you of something else. Just sit down in meditation and try to focus on a candle. Watch how the mind will think by association. Suddenly that candle will be that day at the beach where you saw that hot girl or guy. And then you went on a date, and then it led, within a few minutes, your mind will be off in some other direction. That's what we mean by trying to restrain it from doing that. Restraining the mind from being restless. Restraining the mind from thinking by association. You are the witness. You are watching your mind. You are not the mind. You are the one, the self, that has to master it. Because a mastered mind can do anything. So he goes on to the next sutra to explain what the consciousness of self-mastery is, which I just explained. It is one who is free from the cravings for objects seen or heard about. So anybody who doesn't crave anything of the world. Once you get in touch with the self, which is everything, the world and all its objects they're just toys. They're nothing special. You don't really think too much of them because the self and the feeling of the self is so much greater. It's only when we do not have permanent peace and happiness that we go outside of ourselves to seek it in something else, such as a car. And what happens? Oh, I really want that car. Oh, I know I'll be so happy if I can just get that car. And my mind is restless until I get it, and then I get it, and then my mind is temporarily appeased for 1 or 2 weeks, and then there's something else that I want. There's something else that I crave, and then I won't rest until I get it. And so happiness is constantly deferred, and you're never really happy in the world because the world is not permanent, and the things that you crave don't last. Whereas the self is. The self is permanent. The self is happiness. The self is bliss. And once you achieve and get to that level, that higher level of consciousness, you don't really want anything of the world. Oh, things will come to you and enjoy them. Why not? But you won't run after them. Instead, the interesting thing, they'll start to run after you. Yes, that's the real secret of success. If you run after things, they run away from you. If you don't want anything and you run away from things, they'll start running after you. It's very true. It's very, very, very true. Okay. So when there is non-thirst for even the gunas, these are the constituents of nature. The gunas are these 3 things of nature, these 3 energies of nature: tamas, rajas, sattva. Sattva is the calm, tranquil state. Rajas is excitement, intensity, passion. And tamas is inertia, dull, lethargy. We are governed by these three forces. When we don't have a craving for them, when we don't crave things for the excitement that a computer game, oh, I want to get a computer game because oh, it makes me excited and I like the excited feeling. It makes me feel alive. When we don't have any craving for that, when we just have established this self-mastery and we're resting in our own true self, you have achieved supreme detachment, supreme non-attachment. You have achieved this. And then he goes into the different types of samadhi. Samadhi is, again, the different higher levels of reality, which I will discuss in the next video. So thank you very much for attending this session on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, extraordinary scientific inquiry into the nature of your mind and how to master it.